So, Joshua, here we go. Now, imagine binge watching the Old Testament. You probably wouldn't start with Joshua. I get it. It feels like the beginning of season 6. And in some ways, Joshua is season 6. It is the 6th book of the Bible. The first 5 books, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers and Deuteronomy, are often thought as like a box set in their own right. They're known as the Pentateuch, which sounds mysterious, but it just means 5 books. Pent is 5. It's not a great title, is it? But it's an amazing story. And it continues in Joshua. Now, you could go back to the beginning of the Bible to catch up, as it were. And the Bible is one of those few books which really starts at the very beginning. In the beginning, with the words, in the beginning. That's at the beginning of the book of Genesis, which means beginning. It really means beginning, before the creation of the universe. So you can't start every story there. If you've been on like an exciting day trip and one of your friends sits you down and says, is really excited, okay, tell me everything, go back to the beginning. Don't start with, so, in the beginning, God made the heavens and the earth. You'll get punched. Don't do that. So that's where we're starting. Book 6 with Joshua. You've got to start somewhere. So before we even get into Joshua itself, though, there's a lesson for us right here about how we are part of a much bigger story that's been going on from before the creation of the universe. It never ends. It's got no beginning. It's kind of got no ending. Now, eternity is a hard concept to get our heads around. And I guess you could say this has been proved. There was a movie called The Never-Ending Story, which was released in 1984. Okay, that's a long time ago. I was about 9. It lasted 93 minutes, so it was an hour and a half. And it did end, didn't it? So after 93 minutes, the movie was over. But isn't it the never-ending story? Shouldn't it be still running? No. Okay, well, maybe they managed to tell the whole story that never ended in 93 minutes, which is impressive. But of course, there was a sequel 6 years later, The Never-Ending Story Part 2, which is 4 minutes shorter than the first movie. So now what am I supposed to think? It's all very confusing. The point is, eternity and infinity are hard concepts for us to get our heads around. But they are written in our hearts. They are we are literally made eternal beings. It's in the source code almost of our beings, the operating system. And so that's because the idea that we die is just appalling. The thought that we die just is the worst thing. And people get really angry about death. And of course they would. Why wouldn't they? But it's because death doesn't belong. And there's a lot of death in the book of Joshua that we're going to see. But we'll talk about that when we get there. So back to Joshua. It's not the beginning, but every story starts somewhere in the middle. There's always a backstory to catch up on unless you get right back to the beginning, at which point someone says, yeah, but who created God? And then your brain melts. Star Wars is the most successful movie franchise in human history, pretty much. And it started with episode 4, A New Hope. And after a brief gun battle, which is quite exciting, 2 droids are wandering around the desert having a bit of an argument. Now, Joshua is Bible episode 6. And it doesn't quite start like Star Wars with a gun battle with lasers, although now you're probably wishing that it did. And we don't have 2 droids wandering around the desert. But we do have 2 people, Moses and Joshua, coming out of the desert with a new hope. With a new hope. Moses and Joshua together. What a team. Brilliant. This is going to be amazing. Except Moses is dead within 5 words of Joshua. Read Joshua 1 verse 1. After the death of Moses, a servant of the Lord. Whoa, time out. Wait, Moses is dead? He's one of the biggest names in the Bible. He's like a megastar. While God's people, the descendants of Abraham, were in slavery in Egypt, Moses, plucked from the river and raised by the Pharaoh's daughter, Exodus 2, he murdered someone, was caught, ran away. But then Moses makes a sensational comeback after encountering God at the burning bush, Exodus 3 and 4. 12 plagues, angel of death, Passover. God's people were free. Off they go. And then while in the wilderness, Moses met with God on Mount Sinai in Exodus 19 to 40 and the book of Leviticus. But at that moment, the moment Israel were about to enter the land of safety and plenty, the land of milk and honey, they got scared. That's Numbers 13 and 14. And it all went wrong. Moses just about kept it all together and made some very long and inspiring speeches. That's basically the book of Deuteronomy. And now a whole generation later, they're ready to go into the land that they've been promised. Okay, into the promised land. They were in Egypt. Moses has led them out. And now they're waiting to go into the promised land. So Moses is a biblical superhero. Okay, he is like, he's right up there. He gets a lot of positive coverage in the New Testament as well. And now he's dead. He can't really be dead though. Can he? Can he be dead? I don't think he's dead. Because I've seen this in the movies. You read it in books. It's an old trick. Shakespeare does it. Hollywood does it. Gandalf goes into the pit fighting the Balrog. We get this in the New Testament too with Jesus. The hero dies. But it turns out he's not actually dead. Okay, he is actually dead. But he comes back. So let's read on in Joshua chapter 1. Okay, it could be very exciting. Joshua 1:1. Let's keep reading. Here we go. The Lord said to Joshua, the son of Nun, Moses' assistant, Moses, my servant, is dead. Oh, so that's confirmed then. By the Lord himself, Moses is dead. There's not going to be any comeback here. But again, let's stop and think before going any further. As this actually might be the point. Okay, people come and go. They're born and they die. That's what happens to people. They die. It's one of the few certainties that we have in this life. Hebrews 9 verse 27 says this: it is appointed for man to die once, and after that comes judgment. Hebrews 9:27. Moses came and went. Joshua came and went. Human heroes come and go. But God lives. He lives on, and he is at work. Moses was never a hero to begin with. He was a murderer and a coward. And when God called him to rescue his people at the burning bush, Moses said, thanks, but no thanks. In fact, he says 4 times, seriously, you've got the wrong guy, send someone else. But it's through someone like Moses, who hated speaking in public, that God is shown to be at work. Now, if Moses was some superhero, people might think that he could bring plagues and part the Red Sea. But actually, he couldn't. No one was going to mistake Moses for a real superhero. And that's encouraging, isn't it? That God can just use ordinary people, people who don't like speaking in public, people who feel afraid. Moses is all of those things. So we can be really encouraged by that. If you feel afraid, if you feel that you're not up to the job, you can't do it. Well, God uses people like you and me to do his work. That's kind of amazing, isn't it? Now, Joshua is a successful military general, in fact, and he's been doing pretty well. Throughout the book named after Joshua, we see Joshua, but actually what we really see is God at work. God leads and Joshua follows. So here's the big point of the day. Here we go. The book of Joshua isn't really about Joshua. Okay? The book of Joshua, it's not really about Joshua. It's about God and how he is at work among his people, building his kingdom. Now, our situation is different. It's thousands of years later, but people still die. Moses dies. Joshua, spoilers, dies. In fact, everyone in the Bible is dead. Almost. There's something in this at the extras at the end, which we can talk about, which is kind of interesting. But the main thing for us now today is this. In Joshua, we read God's story is going on and on. And it can, because God is eternal. And actually, we are eternal. But God made everything. He doesn't die like Moses or Joshua. God became man in Jesus. They tried to kill him. That didn't really work, did it? God is eternal. And Joshua and the whole Bible story is his story. It's God's story that we get to be a part of. So, here's the thought for the day. Do you feel like you're part of God's story? Or does Jesus just have a walk-on part in your story? Who is at the centre of your universe? Is it you? Or is it Jesus, God's King? How do you pray? Because this might show who's at the centre. How do you pray? Do you pray for God to give you stuff? Now, if you do, that's okay. Jesus tells us to pray and ask for things. It's there in the Lord's Prayer. Give us today our daily bread. Great, we can pray that. But it's the 6th line of the Lord's Prayer. So, let's look at the first 5 lines. In fact, they're going to appear on the screen. Why don't you pray them and see what it's all about and how God is the centre of the universe and that we are part of his story. Okay? Here we go. Pray either out loud or in your head. Ready? Here we go. Amen. So that's the thought for the day. Now here's something to say when someone asks you what this video was about. Because maybe your mum or your dad or your brother or sister or something might ask you, what is it? And so here's a talking point. Here's something you can say. Something to say. The book of Joshua is not about Joshua. And when they go, huh? Then you can talk about it. You can tell them how it's actually about God. Okay, we're done. But if I've got some more if you're interested. Okay, kind of fun facts, next material if you're curious, sort of behind the scenes footage, as it were, in a section of bonus material I call the action replay. Okay, we go back over a few details and take a look because they're fun, weird or interesting, and there might be some analysis, reverse camera angles, punditry and general commentary. Okay, action replay. Why does it say the Lord in my Bible? What's with the capital letters? Good question. Ever wondered why it says the Lord in the Old Testament? It might say all caps or small caps. Why doesn't it just say Lord or God? Now, that Lord in capitals is a translation of the word Yahweh, and God's special name revealed to Moses in Exodus 3:14. Okay, it means I am. There are other Hebrew words for God that just mean divine being, like the word Elohim. But that could actually be the name of a false god or an idol or some other spirit or heavenly being. The Lord refers to the one and only holy I am. And so to avoid all doubt, it's there in capital letters. So that's why it says the Lord in capital letters. Jesus didn't die. Okay, I mentioned earlier that Jesus didn't die, but that he did actually die. It's really important that he died fully and actually died so that he could be the sacrificial lamb to die in our place. And actually, I was playing a bit fast and loose anyway because I was kind of in the zone back there. And the fact that not everyone in the Bible has died. So Enoch didn't die. Okay, he's in Genesis 5. Look it up. Seriously, verses 21 to 23. The Lord, he walked with God and God took him away. Whoa, what's going on there? In actual fact, Enoch was a figure of real fascination to the Jews, especially actually around the time of Jesus. There were lots of books, because there's like 1 Enoch and 2 Enoch, which are kind of books that are a bit like the Bible, but they're not in the Bible because they're a little bit crazy. But, that's one for another time. Also, Enoch is not the only person in the Old Testament who doesn't die. Who's the other one? Do you know? It's Elijah. He didn't die either. He was caught up to heaven by a chariot made of fire, which you would think is probably pretty lethal. Maybe it is. But you can read about that in 2 Kings 2, 9 to 12 for yourself. And then you can keep reading and you'll see how Elisha took over from Elijah, like Joshua from Moses. And then some kids teased Elisha for being bald, and then some bears came out of the wood and attacked them and killed them. Wow. Did they teach you that at Sunday school? I'm not sure they did. Last one. What's the Torah? I mentioned it earlier, the Pentateuch. Torah means law or instruction. It's another name for the first 5 books of the Bible. Even though those books contain plenty of history as well as the laws that God's people were to live by, and various commandments and codes given to Moses. During the time of Jesus, the people that hung around the temple would have been very, very, very familiar with the first 5 books of the Bible. And they would try to read them and understand them as we do with all 66 books of the Bible. Some of them would even have memorized all 5 books, so they would have been able to have recited all of them. For a variety of reasons, they took them very seriously, but also scrolls were quite expensive. And they didn't have paper in the same way that we do now, and they didn't have apps as well. So they just had to learn it. Anyway, that's the action replay as the bit of bonus material. Hope you enjoyed it, and I'll speak to you next time.